Hi, I'm Vanessa Reid. 4 years ago, I stood in my father's pristine office while he told me beekeeping was a hobby for retirees and hippies, not a business for his daughter. Last month, I signed a contract selling my honey brand to Whole Foods for $44 million. He called 3 times that day. I didn't answer. But this isn't a story about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It's about the 1,000 small cuts that came before that moment, the ones that taught me my dreams were worth less than his approval, and how a few acres of Oregon wilderness and 30,000 bees showed me what family actually means. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The gravel popped under my tires as I pulled up to the cabin for the first time in 3 years. Grandmother Iris had left it to me in her will, along with a handwritten note that said, "Use it for something that makes your heart loud." I didn't understand what she meant back then. I was 26, working 60-hour weeks at a marketing firm in Portland, answering to people who measured success in clicks and conversions. My heart wasn't loud. It barely whispered. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered, tucked between twisted juniper trees with the Cascade peaks rising blue and distant behind it. The wood siding had weathered to a soft silver gray. One of the porch steps sagged in the middle. The windows were dusty but intact. 3 acres of high desert stretched out behind it, wild grasses swaying in the late afternoon wind, dotted with sagebrush and the occasional wildflower I couldn't name. I sat in the car for a while after I turned off the engine, hands still gripping the steering wheel. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A text from Natalie, my older sister. "Dad wants to know if you're still planning to waste Grandma's property on whatever phase this is." Phase. That's what they've been calling it for the past 2 months, ever since I'd announced at Sunday dinner that I was leaving my job to start a beekeeping operation. Natalie had set down her wine glass slowly, like she was trying not to spill something precious. Mom had blinked twice and looked at Dad, waiting for him to respond first. He'd leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin in that way he did when he was about to deliver a verdict. "Beekeeping," he'd said. "You want to quit a salaried position with benefits to play with insects." "It's not playing," I'd said. "It's agriculture. It's a business." He'd smiled then, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Vanessa, I built a company from the ground up. I know what a business looks like. This is a quarter-life crisis with a prettier name." Natalie had nodded along like he was reciting scripture. "You could at least consult with someone who knows the industry," she'd added. "Do some market research. Create a business plan that isn't just, 'I think honey sounds nice.'" I did have a business plan. I'd spent 3 months researching apiculture, attending workshops, talking to commercial beekeepers in eastern Oregon. I'd calculated startup costs, projected revenue, identified my niche in the artisanal local honey market that was growing faster than most people realized. But I'd learned a long time ago that presenting facts to my father didn't matter if he'd already decided you were wrong. Mom had reached across the table and patted my hand. "Maybe you just need a vacation, sweetheart. Some time to think clearly." I pulled my hand back. "I am thinking clearly. This is what I want to do." Dad had stood up then, signaling the conversation was over. "When you're ready to have a serious discussion about your future, we'll be here. Until then, I'm not going to enable a fantasy." That had been 8 weeks ago. I'd quit my job the following Monday. Packed my apartment the week after. And now here I sat, staring at a cabin that smelled like old pine and dust, with $8,500 left from Grandmother Iris's modest inheritance and a dream everyone I loved thought was laughable. I got out of the car and pulled my duffel bag from the trunk. The air smelled different here than it did in Portland, drier and sharper, touched with juniper and something wilder I couldn't name. I walked up the porch steps, the sagging one creaking under my weight, and unlocked the door with the brass key the estate lawyer had mailed me. Inside, everything was exactly as I remembered from childhood visits. The small stone fireplace. The kitchen with its chipped tile counters and avocado green stove from the 1970s. The narrow hallway leading to 2 tiny bedrooms. Grandmother Iris had lived simply, spending most of her time in the garden or hiking the trails that wound through the hills behind the property. She'd been the only person in the family who never asked me what my 5-year plan was or whether I was maximizing my potential. I dropped my bag on the faded couch and walked to the kitchen window. Beyond the clearing, I could see where I'd set up the hives. I'd already ordered 4 nucleus colonies, scheduled to arrive in 2 weeks. I'd spent the last month building the hive boxes in my apartment, watching tutorial videos at midnight, my hands smelling of wood glue and pine. Natalie had stopped by once, seen the equipment spread across my living room floor, and said, "You know you can just buy honey at the store, right?" But this wasn't about honey. Not really. It was about building something with my own hands, something that didn't require approval from men in conference rooms or validation from people who thought success only looked one way. It was about the fact that bees, despite their size, despite how fragile they seemed, could create something extraordinary when given the right environment. I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. The hives arrived on a Thursday morning in late April. The delivery driver looked skeptical as he helped me unload the boxes. "You sure you know what you're doing out here alone?" I signed for the delivery and smiled. "I'm about to find out." Installing the bees was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I wore the full suit, gloves, veil, even though the nucleus colonies were supposedly gentle. My hands shook as I transferred the frames into the hive boxes I'd built. Thousands of bees crawled over the comb, and I could feel the hum of them vibrating through my gloves, through the air, through my chest. One of the hives didn't take well at first. The queen seemed stressed, and the workers were agitated. I spent 3 sleepless nights researching, calling the beekeeper I'd bought the colonies from, adjusting the hive entrance, checking for mites and disease. On the 4th morning, I walked out to find them flying in steady loops, landing on the nearby wildflowers, returning heavy with pollen. I stood there in my pajamas and bare feet, watching them work, and felt something unlock in my chest. My phone rang. Dad's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. He called again an hour later. This time I answered. "Vanessa, I've been trying to reach you. I'm here. I'm fine. Your mother is worried. You haven't returned any of her texts." "I've been busy." There was a pause, the kind of silence that felt like judgment condensed into sound. "Busy with the bees." "Yes." He sighed. "I'm not trying to be harsh, but someone has to be realistic with you. You've invested your entire inheritance into something with no guaranteed return. What happens when the hives fail? When you realize this isn't sustainable?" I watched a bee land on the porch railing, its legs thick with golden pollen. "They're not going to fail. You don't know that. You have no experience. No backup plan. I have a plan. I've done the research. Research isn't the same as real-world application. I've seen 100 startups crash because people confused passion with viability. Maybe," I said slowly, "this isn't a startup. Maybe it's just my life, and I get to decide what I do with it." Another pause. "When you're ready to come back to reality, we'll help you. But I won't watch you throw away your future because you're too stubborn to admit this was a mistake." He hung up before I could respond. I set the phone down on the railing and went back inside. In the kitchen, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the small wooden table Grandmother Iris had refinished by hand. On the wall across from me hung a photograph of her standing in this very clearing, holding a basket of vegetables, smiling like she'd just been told the best secret in the world. I thought about what she'd written in her note. "Use it for something that makes your heart loud." My heart wasn't loud yet. But it was getting there. The first month was harder than I'd expected. The learning curve was steep. I had to monitor the hives daily, checking for signs of disease, making sure the queens were laying properly, ensuring the bees had enough space to expand. I read everything I could find about integrated pest management, seasonal flows, swarm prevention. I joined online forums where commercial beekeepers shared advice and complained about varroa mites and colony collapse disorder. At night, I'd collapse into bed with my muscles aching from lifting supers and frames, my skin smelling of smoke from the smoker I used to calm the hives. I dreamed about bees, thousands of them moving in perfect choreographed patterns, building comb, storing honey, dancing to communicate where the best flowers were. I didn't tell my family how hard it was. I didn't tell them about the week I thought I'd lost an entire hive to American foulbrood, or how I'd cried when I realized it was just a false alarm. I didn't tell them how I'd started setting my alarm for dawn so I could sit outside with my coffee and watch the bees take their first flights of the day, the sun turning their wings translucent gold. Natalie texted occasionally. Checking in. Hope you're not getting stung too much. Dad says you haven't called. I replied with short, non-committal answers. Things are good. Busy. Talk soon. What I didn't say was that I was happier than I'd been in years. That I'd started selling small batches of honey at the Bend Farmers Market on Saturday mornings, and people kept coming back, saying they'd never tasted honey like this before. That I'd met other small farmers and artisans who understood why I'd left a corporate job to work with my hands. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That I was learning the names of wildflowers, the patterns of weather, the language of bees. I didn't say any of that because I knew how it would sound to them. Like I was justifying a mistake. Like I was trying to convince myself I hadn't made a terrible decision. By the end of the first summer, I'd harvested my first real crop. 240 pounds of honey, pale gold and fragrant with the wildflowers that grew in the high desert around the cabin. I designed simple labels on my laptop, printed them at the local copy shop. Cascade Meadow Honey. Small batch. Raw and unfiltered. Bend, Oregon. I drove into Portland on a Sunday and showed up at my parents' house unannounced. Mom answered the door, surprised. Vanessa, we didn't know you were coming. I wasn't planning to. I held up a jar of honey. But I wanted to give you this. She took it carefully, holding it up to the light. It's beautiful. It's from the hives. My first real harvest. Dad appeared behind her in the hallway. Vanessa. Hi, Dad. He looked at the jar in Mom's hand, then at me. You drove 2.5 hours to bring us honey. I drove 2.5 hours to show you what I've been doing. He didn't move from the doorway. We've seen what you've been doing. You've been playing farmer on your grandmother's property instead of building a real career. Gerald, Mom said softly. He ignored her. I'm serious. How much did you make from that jar? $5? 10? That's not a business, Vanessa. That's a very expensive hobby. I felt something harden in my chest, something that had been soft and hopeful when I'd pulled into their driveway. I'd actually sold that batch for $18 a jar at the farmer's market, and people had asked when I'd have more. But I didn't say that. Instead, I looked at my father and said, "You're right. It's not what you would build. But it's mine." I turned and walked back to my car. Mom called after me, but I didn't stop. I could feel Dad's eyes on my back, could imagine the look on his face. Disappointment wrapped in vindication. I cried the whole drive back to Bend. But the next Saturday, I sold out of every jar I'd brought to the market. And the Saturday after that. And the one after that. By October, I had a waiting list. Winter in Central Oregon was brutal. The temperature dropped below freezing most nights, and snow piled up around the cabin in drifts that reached the windows. The bees clustered together inside the hives, keeping the queen warm, vibrating their flight muscles to generate heat. I insulated the hives with tar paper and foam, reduced the entrances to keep out mice, and left them with enough honey stores to survive until spring. I spent the dark months planning. I designed a real website. I researched wholesale opportunities. I reached out to local restaurants and specialty stores. I applied for a small business loan and was denied. I applied again at a different bank and was approved for $15,000. In January, Natalie called. She didn't call often, so when her name appeared on my screen, I felt my stomach tighten. "Hey," I answered. "Hey." Her voice sounded strange, tight. I wanted to give you a heads up. Dad's retiring. I sat up straighter on the couch. What? He's stepping down from the firm. They're announcing it next week. Why didn't he tell me? She was quiet for a moment. I think he's embarrassed. About retiring? About needing to. She sighed. His health hasn't been great. High blood pressure, stress. The doctor told him he needed to slow down. I didn't know what to say. Dad had built his consulting firm from nothing, spent 30 years growing it into one of the most respected tech advisory companies in the Pacific Northwest. It was his identity, his proof that he'd done everything right. He's going to have a lot of time on his hands, Natalie continued. Mom thinks he might want to reconnect. With you. I looked out the window at the snow-covered clearing, the hives buried under white drifts like small fortresses. Reconnect, I said. Or criticize me in person instead of over the phone? Vanessa. I'm serious. He made it very clear what he thinks of my choices. People say things they don't mean when they're scared. He wasn't scared. He was dismissive. Maybe that's the same thing for him. I didn't respond. Natalie had always been better at seeing the complexity in Dad, at translating his harshness into something softer. I'd spent most of my life wishing I could do the same, but every time I tried, I just felt smaller. Think about it, okay? She said. Just think about it. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness and thought about all the times I'd wanted Dad to see me, really see me, not as an extension of his expectations but as my own person. I thought about the award ceremonies he'd missed because he was traveling for work, the school projects he'd glanced at and nodded without really looking, the way he'd praised Natalie for getting into law school but barely acknowledged when I'd graduated summa cum laude with my marketing degree. I thought about the fact that he was retiring, that time was finite, that maybe Natalie was right and I should try. Then I thought about the way he'd looked at my jar of honey like it was a participation trophy from a game that didn't matter. I didn't call him. Spring arrived slowly, reluctantly, the snow melting in patches to reveal the dormant grasses beneath. The bees emerged from their winter cluster one warm afternoon in March, and I stood outside the hives watching them take cleansing flights, their bodies dark against the pale blue sky. They'd survived. All 4 hives had made it through. I expanded to 8 hives that year. Then 12. The honey kept getting better, richer, more complex. I learned which flowers produced the most interesting flavors, started managing the surrounding land to encourage native blooms. I let sections go wild, planted pollinator gardens, worked with neighboring landowners to reduce pesticide use. By the 3rd summer, Cascade Meadow honey was in 6 stores across Bend and Redmond. A food blogger from Portland discovered it and wrote a review calling it the best honey she'd ever tasted, liquid gold with notes of sage and wildflower and something indefinably Oregon. Orders started coming from outside the state. I hired my first employee, a college student named Tyler who wanted to learn beekeeping. Then another, an older woman named June who just moved to Bend and needed part-time work. We built a small processing shed behind the cabin, installed an extractor and bottling equipment, created a rhythm of harvest and production that felt more like collaboration than labor. Mr. Holloway, the elderly neighbor who lived a mile down the road, started stopping by on his morning walks. He'd been a beekeeper himself 40 years ago, and he'd sit on the porch with me, drinking coffee, sharing stories about the hives he used to keep before arthritis made it too difficult. Your grandmother would be proud, he told me one morning. She always said you had something special in you. I wish she could see this, I said. He smiled. She can. Don't doubt that. I thought about showing Dad. Driving to Portland, bringing him out to see the operation, the hives, the shed, the honey that was now shipping to 12 states. But every time I pulled out my phone to call him, I remembered the way he dismissed me, and the anger would rise up fresh and sharp. He'd made his opinion clear. He didn't believe in what I was doing. And I'd learned, slowly and painfully, that I didn't need him to. The real shift happened in late summer of year 3. I was at the Bend Farmers Market, my usual Saturday spot, when a woman in expensive activewear approached the table. She picked up a jar, examined the label, unscrewed the lid to smell the honey inside. "This is remarkable," she said. "Where do you source it?" I gestured vaguely east. "About 15 miles that way. My bees forage on high desert wildflowers, mostly on my property and the surrounding public land." "You're the beekeeper." "I'm the beekeeper." She smiled. "I'm Patricia Drummond. I'm a regional buyer for Whole Foods, Specialty Products Division." My heart kicked against my ribs. I kept my expression neutral. "Nice to meet you." She set the jar back down carefully. "How much do you produce annually?" "Last year we did about 4,200 pounds. This year we're on track for 6,500. Patricia pulled out her phone, typed something. "Do you wholesale?" "I do. I'm in 6 stores locally." She nodded slowly, still looking at her phone. "What if I told you I wanted to talk about regional distribution? Maybe the entire Pacific Northwest to start?" I stared at her. "Are you serious?" She looked up, meeting my eyes. "Your product is exactly what we're looking for. Artisanal, sustainable, local. The story behind it matters to our customers. If you're interested, I'd like to schedule a formal tasting with our product team." I managed to nod. "Yes. Absolutely." She handed me her card. "Email me your production specs, your story, any press you've gotten. We'll go from there." After she walked away, I sat down hard on the folding chair behind my table. Tyler, who was helping me that day, leaned over. "Did that just happen?" "I think so. That's Whole Foods." "I know." He grinned. "That's insane." I called Aunt Lorraine that night. She was my mom's younger sister, the one who'd always encouraged me to follow my own path, who'd sent me a care package my first month at the cabin with a note that said, "Your grandmother always knew you were meant for wild things." Lorraine screamed when I told her about Patricia. She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Have you told your parents?" she asked when she'd calmed down. "No. Vanessa. I don't know what to say to them. Dad spent 3 years telling me this was a waste of time. And now you're about to prove him spectacularly wrong." She laughed. "That must feel good." "It doesn't, actually. It just feels lonely." She was quiet for a moment. "You know what your grandmother used to say? That the people who love you will celebrate you when you succeed, and the people who don't will find reasons why it doesn't count." She paused. "You deserve celebration, honey. Don't let anyone take that from you." But I wasn't sure I believed her. Because deep down, beneath the excitement and the opportunity and the validation, there was still a small voice that sounded like my father asking, "Is this really success, or are you just lucky?" I pushed that voice down and got to work. The meeting with Whole Foods happened on a Tuesday in September, in a conference room that overlooked the San Francisco Bay. I'd driven down the day before, spent the night in a budget hotel near the airport, and woke up at 5 in the morning unable to fall back asleep. I'd brought 12 jars of honey, each one representing a different harvest period, a different expression of the high desert landscape I'd come to know intimately. Patricia met me in the lobby with a warm handshake and led me upstairs. The product team consisted of 5 people, all of them holding tablets and coffee cups, all of them looking at me with the polite curiosity reserved for small producers who might have something interesting but probably wouldn't scale. I set up my jars on the table in chronological order. Spring wildflower, early summer sage, midsummer mixed blossom, late summer rabbitbrush, early fall aster. Each one a slightly different color, from pale champagne to deep amber. "Walk us through your process," Patricia said. I took a breath and began. I managed 12 hives on 3 acres in central Oregon, high desert terrain at about 3,200 feet elevation. The bees forage on native and naturalized plants, mostly unmanaged land. I don't feed them sugar syrup or treat with harsh chemicals. What you're tasting is a direct expression of place and season. One of the team members, a man with silver glasses, opened the spring wildflower jar and dipped a small spoon inside. He tasted it slowly, thoughtfully. This is exceptional. What's the primary source? Lupin, balsam root, bitterbrush. All native to the eastern Cascades. They passed the jar around. Each person tasted, made notes on their tablets. Then they moved to the next jar, and the next. I watched their faces, trying to read their reactions, but they were professionals. They gave nothing away. After they'd tasted all 5, Patricia leaned back in her chair. Your consistency is remarkable. Most small producers have wild variation batch to batch. That's intentional, I said. Each jar is meant to be different. It's not a bug, it's a feature. People who buy this honey aren't looking for uniformity. They're looking for authenticity. The woman to Patricia's left, someone I'd been introduced to as the director of regional sourcing, spoke up. How much can you produce if we placed a substantial order? I'd prepared for this question, had run the numbers a dozen times. With my current setup, I can do about 8,000 pounds annually. But I could scale to 20,000 within 18 months with additional hives and another employee. What about 30,000? I hesitated. That would require significant capital investment. More land, more equipment, possibly a larger processing facility. But it's possible. It's possible. They exchanged glances, the kind of silent communication that happens between people who've worked together for years. Patricia set down her pen. We'd like to start with a trial run. 6 stores, 3 months, see how it performs. If the numbers are good, we expand regionally. Does that work for you? I tried to keep my voice steady. That works for me. We'll send over a contract next week. She stood, extended her hand. Welcome to Whole Foods, Vanessa. I shook her hand, shook everyone's hands, gathered my jars carefully back into the box I'd brought them in. I made it all the way to the parking garage before I started shaking. I sat in my truck with my forehead pressed against the steering wheel and let myself feel the enormity of what had just happened. Then I called Aunt Lorraine. She answered on the first ring. Well? They want to do a trial run. 6 stores. She screamed again, and this time I laughed through the tears that had started without my permission. When I'd composed myself, she said, you have to tell your parents. I know. I'm serious. They need to hear this from you, not from someone else. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. What if Dad just finds a way to minimize it? Then that's on him, not you. You've done something incredible, Vanessa. Don't let his limitations make you shrink. After we hung up, I sat in the parking garage for another 20 minutes, trying to work up the courage. Finally, I dialed Mom's number. She answered warmly. Vanessa, hi sweetheart. How are you? I'm good. I'm in San Francisco, actually. I just had a meeting. Oh. She sounded curious but cautious, like she wasn't sure if this was going to be good news or another thing she'd have to defend me over. With Whole Foods. They want to carry my honey. Silence. Then, Whole Foods. Yes. Vanessa, that's wonderful. That's really wonderful. Her voice had changed, gotten brighter, more animated. When does this happen? They're sending a contract next week. It's a trial run at first, but if it goes well, it could expand. Have you told your father? Not yet. I was calling to see if maybe I could come over this weekend. Tell you both in person. She hesitated. He's been having a hard time with the retirement. He's been a little withdrawn. I understand. But I think he'd want to know. Yes. Yes, of course. Come Saturday. I'll make lunch. I drove back to Bend that afternoon, windows down, music loud, letting the wind tear through the truck cab. The landscape shifted as I drove north, from the brown hills of California to the green forests of southern Oregon, then into the high desert country I'd come to think of as home. By the time I pulled into the cabin's driveway, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything gold and pink. Tyler and June were closing up the shed when I walked over. They looked up expectantly. "We got it," I said. June clapped her hands together. "I knew it. I knew they'd love it." Tyler high-fived me, then immediately started asking logistical questions about production timelines and whether we'd need to hire more help. We stood outside the shed talking until the light faded completely and the first stars appeared, bright and sharp in the clear desert air. That night, I lay in bed thinking about all the moments that had led here. The first time I'd opened a hive and seen the perfect geometry of honeycomb. The morning I'd tasted my first harvest and realized it was actually good, actually something worth sharing. The farmer's market where people kept coming back week after week, telling me they'd never had honey like this. The quiet accumulation of small successes that nobody in my family had witnessed or acknowledged. I thought about Saturday, about sitting across from Dad and telling him that the thing he'd dismissed as a hobby was about to be in Whole Foods stores across the Pacific Northwest. Part of me wanted to see his face, to watch him realize he'd been wrong. But a larger part of me just felt tired, bone tired from years of trying to earn recognition that never came. Saturday arrived cold and drizzly, typical October weather in Portland. I drove into the city mid-morning, practiced what I was going to say at least a dozen times on the way. By the time I pulled up to my parents' house, a craftsman-style place in Laurelhurst with a manicured lawn and blooming mums in ceramic pots on the porch, I felt almost calm. Mom answered the door before I could knock. She pulled me into a hug, held me longer than usual. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Inside, the house smelled like roasting chicken and rosemary. Classical music played softly from the kitchen. Everything looked the same as it always had, the same art on the walls, the same throw pillows on the couch, the same sense of careful perfection that had always made me feel like I needed to watch where I stepped. Dad was in his office. Mom led me down the hall and knocked gently on the door. "Gerald? Vanessa's here." He looked up from his computer, reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked older than I remembered, more tired. The retirement had taken something from him, some essential energy that had always made him seem larger than life. "Vanessa." He stood, came around the desk. "It's good to see you." We hugged briefly, awkwardly. I sat in the leather chair across from his desk while Mom excused herself to check on lunch. "So," he said, settling back into his own chair. "Your mother mentioned you had news." "I did. I met with Whole Foods on Tuesday. They're going to start carrying Cascade Meadow honey in 6 of their stores as a trial run." He blinked. "Whole Foods?" "Yes. That's significant." "It is." He leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin in that familiar gesture. "How did that come about?" "One of their buyers found me at the farmer's market. She liked the product, brought it to her team, and they offered me a contract." "And you can fulfill the order? You have the capacity?" "I'll need to scale up, but yes. I can fulfill it." He nodded slowly, and I couldn't read his expression. It wasn't quite approval, but it wasn't dismissal either. It was something in between, something cautious. That's good business sense. Making sure you can deliver before you overcommit. "I've been working on this for 3 years, Dad. I know what I'm doing." 3 years isn't very long in business terms. It's long enough to know whether something works. He took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I'm not trying to diminish this, Vanessa. It's impressive. I just want to make sure you're thinking long-term. Retail partnerships can be unpredictable. I've thought about it. I've built flexibility into my projections." "Good." He put his glasses back on. "Good." We sat there in silence for a moment. I waited for him to say something more, to acknowledge that he'd been wrong about this being a waste of time, but he just looked at his computer screen like there was something there that required his attention. Mom called us for lunch. We ate in the dining room, chicken and roasted vegetables and a salad with pecans and blue cheese. Natalie joined us halfway through, arriving breathless with apologies about a client call that ran long. When Mom told her my news, she smiled and said, "That's amazing, Ness," but there was something distracted in her expression, like she was already thinking about whatever she had to do next. After lunch, Dad excused himself for a nap. Mom walked me to the door. "He's adjusting," she said quietly. "This is all very new for him, not working." "I know. He's proud of you. He just doesn't know how to say it." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that underneath the caution and the qualifications, there was pride. But I'd spent too many years translating his silence into love to keep doing it now. I drove back to Bend feeling hollow. The meeting had gone exactly as I'd expected, and somehow that made it worse. The Whole Foods trial launched in November. 6 stores across Oregon and Washington, my honey sitting on shelves next to brands I'd admired for years. Patricia had been right about the story matching. Each jar had a label with a photo of the cabin, a brief paragraph about high desert beekeeping, and my signature at the bottom. It felt vulnerable, putting myself on the product like that, but it worked. People responded to authenticity. Sales exceeded projections within the first month. By January, Patricia called to expand to 20 stores. By March, it was 40. I hired 3 more employees, leased an additional 2 acres from Mr. Holloway, built a second processing shed. The operation that had started as 1 woman and 4 hives had become something I barely recognized. June became my operations manager. Tyler took over hive management. I spent most of my time on logistics, supply chain, quality control, talking to brokers and buyers and accountants. Some days I missed the simplicity of those early mornings, just me and the bees and the sunrise, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction of watching something I'd built grow into something sustainable. In April, Natalie called. I was in the processing shed, checking a bottling run, when my phone buzzed. "Hey," she said when I answered. "Do you have a minute?" "Sure. What's up?" She hesitated, and I heard papers rustling in the background. "I wanted to ask you something. About the business." "Okay. Are you looking for investors?" I pulled off my gloves, walked outside where I could hear better. "Not actively, but I'm open to conversations." "Why?" She exhaled. "I have a client, a venture capital firm that focuses on sustainable food companies. I mentioned you to them and they're interested in learning more." I leaned against the shed wall. "You told them about me?" "I've been following what you're doing. The Whole Foods thing is really impressive. I thought it might be a good fit." I didn't know what to feel. Surprise, definitely. Maybe gratitude. Maybe suspicion. "How long have you been following it?" "Since the beginning, honestly. I check your website sometimes. I've told a few people about your honey." This was new information, and I didn't quite know what to do with it. "You've been paying attention this whole time and never said anything?" "I know. I'm sorry. I think I didn't want to seem like I was jumping on the bandwagon or something. But I've always thought what you were doing was cool. I just didn't know how to say it without it sounding condescending." I closed my eyes, feeling the afternoon sun warm on my face. "Send me the information. I'll look at it." "Really? Really?" After we hung up, I stood outside for a while, listening to the sound of the bottling machine humming inside the shed, the distant buzz of bees at the hives. Something was shifting, had been shifting for months. The edges of my family that had felt so sharp and cutting were starting to blur, to soften into something I didn't quite understand yet. That evening, I drove into town to meet Mr. Holloway for coffee. We'd been doing this once a week since the expansion, and I'd come to rely on his steady presence, his willingness to listen without trying to fix everything. I told him about Natalie's call, about the investor lead. He stirred sugar into his coffee slowly. "How do you feel about that?" "Confused. She's been watching this whole time and never said anything." "Why now?" "Maybe she didn't know how." He looked up at me with those clear gray eyes that had seen 7 decades of living. "People are complicated, Vanessa. Sometimes they love you but don't know how to show it in ways you can recognize. That doesn't make it not love. But how am I supposed to trust that? You don't have to trust it completely. You just have to decide whether it's worth exploring. He paused. Your grandmother used to say that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about deciding that the past doesn't get to write the whole story. I thought about that as I drove home, the words turning over in my mind like river stones. The past doesn't get to write the whole story. But the past was still there, still sharp in places, still tender. 2 weeks later, I met with Natalie's client. They offered seed funding to scale production, expand distribution, potentially go national. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having access to, enough to transform Cascade Meadow from a regional brand into something that could compete on a much larger stage. I spent a week agonizing over the decision. I called Aunt Lorraine, who told me to trust my gut. I called Patricia at Whole Foods, who said the brand was strong enough to support national expansion if I wanted it. I sat with the bees, watching them work, and thought about what Grandmother Iris would say. In the end, I took the meeting not because I needed the validation or the money, though both were tempting, but because I was curious. Curious about what might be possible if I let myself think bigger than survival, bigger than proving everyone wrong. The day I signed the term sheet, I called Dad. He answered on the third ring. Vanessa. Hi. I wanted to let you know something before it becomes public. I just closed a funding round with a venture capital firm. They're investing in Cascade Meadow to support national expansion. Silence on the other end. Then, how much? 2.3 million. He exhaled slowly. That's substantial. It is. You did this yourself? I had help. Natalie connected me with them. Natalie did? Yes. Another pause. I could hear him breathing, could picture him sitting in his office, trying to process what this meant. That's good. That's really good, Vanessa. Thanks. I'd like to see it sometime. The operation. If you'd be willing to show me. I looked out the window at the hives, at the mountains rising blue in the distance, at the life I'd built from scratch in the shadow of his disappointment. Sure, I said. You can come anytime. We set a date for the following month. After we hung up, I sat with the weight of it, the strange mix of satisfaction and sadness that came with finally being seen by someone who'd looked through you for so long. June knocked on the cabin door an hour later. You okay? You looked a little shell-shocked when you came back from town. I'm okay. Just a lot happening. She sat down on the porch step next to me. You know what's wild? Watching you do all this. I've worked for a lot of people, but I've never seen anyone build something from nothing the way you have. It's inspiring. I don't feel very inspiring most days. That's because you're in it. She smiled. From the outside, it looks like magic. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dad's voice on the phone, the way he'd said I'd like to see it sometime, like he was asking permission to enter a world I'd built without him. Part of me wanted to let him in, to show him everything, to finally have him understand. But another part of me, the part that remembered every dismissal and minimization, wasn't sure he deserved that access. I got out of bed and walked outside. The stars were overwhelming, the way they always were out here away from city lights. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like spilled milk, and I could see satellites moving slowly between the constellations. The bees were quiet in their hives, clustered together against the spring chill, doing the work they'd evolved to do over millions of years. I thought about evolution, about adaptation, about how organisms survive by learning to read their environment and respond. Maybe that's all I was doing. Learning to read the signals, learning when to stay and when to go, learning that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is build a life that doesn't require anyone else's approval to be valid. The next morning, I woke to 17 missed calls. The first call was from Tyler, his voice high and panicked. Vanessa, you need to get down here right now. Someone's at the property and they're filming everything. I threw on clothes and drove the half-mile to the processing facility faster than I should have. When I pulled up, there was a white Mercedes SUV parked sideways across the driveway, blocking the entrance. A camera crew was setting up equipment near the hives, and standing in the middle of it all, dressed in cream linen pants and a flowing tunic that probably cost more than my monthly equipment budget, was Natalie. She waved when she saw me, bright and cheerful like this was completely normal. "Hey. Perfect timing. We're just getting the morning light on the hives." I walked over slowly, trying to process what I was seeing. "What are you doing?" She gestured to the crew, a cameraman and a woman holding a boom mic. "I'm doing a feature for my firm's sustainability initiative, highlighting small businesses that are making a difference. I thought it would be great exposure for you." "You didn't ask me." "I wanted it to be a surprise." Her smile didn't waver, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Everyone's always saying you should get more press coverage, so I made it happen." Tyler appeared at my elbow, arms crossed. "They've been here since 6. They moved some of the equipment without asking." I turned back to Natalie. "You can't just show up and start filming. This is a working facility. We have production schedules, safety protocols." The cameraman lowered his camera, looking uncomfortable. The woman with the boom mic checked her phone. Natalie's smile tightened. "I'm trying to help you, Ness. Do you know how hard it is to get media placement like this? Most people would be grateful. Most people would have been asked first." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're being dramatic. It's a 15-minute segment. We'll be out of your hair by noon." I looked at the crew, at Tyler's frustrated expression, at the hives behind them where my bees were starting their morning flights, oblivious to the chaos. "No." Natalie blinked. "What?" "No. You need to leave. All of you." The cameraman started packing up immediately, clearly relieved. The sound woman followed suit. Natalie stood there, mouth slightly open, like I'd just spoken a language she didn't understand. "Are you serious right now?" "Completely serious. This is my business, my property. You don't get to make decisions about it without talking to me first. I drove 2 hours to do this for you. I didn't ask you to." Her expression shifted, the mask of sisterly concern slipping to show something sharper underneath. "You know what your problem is? You can't accept help. Someone tries to do something nice for you and you act like it's an attack. This isn't help. This is you using my business for your firm's PR without asking permission. That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" She opened her mouth, closed it again. The crew was already loading equipment back into a van. She grabbed her purse from the hood of her car, keys jangling. "Fine. I was trying to be supportive, but clearly you don't want that." She drove off without another word, tires kicking up dust. Tyler let out a long breath. "That was intense." "I know. I'm sorry you had to deal with that." "It's okay." He paused. "Is she always like that?" I thought about all the times Natalie had inserted herself into my life with good intentions that somehow always served her more than me. The time she'd edited my college essay without asking and submitted it to a writing contest under my name, then been hurt when I wasn't grateful she'd won me $50. The time she'd told Mom I was struggling financially when I'd confided in her about a tight month, which led to a lecture from Dad about fiscal responsibility. "Yeah," I said. "She's always like that." The rest of the day felt off balance. I kept replaying the confrontation, wondering if I'd overreacted, if maybe she really had just been trying to help. But every time I circled back to that thought, I remembered the way she dismissed my concerns, the way she'd made it about her effort rather than my boundaries. June found me in the processing shed that afternoon, staring at a batch of labels that needed approval. "You've been looking at that same sheet for 20 minutes. "I know. Want to talk about it?" I told her what had happened. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I appreciated most about her. When I finished, she said, "Sounds like she wanted credit for helping more than she actually wanted to help." That's exactly what it felt like. Some people think good intentions excuse bad execution. She picked up one of the label sheets, examined it. These look good, by the way. You should approve them. I signed off on the labels and tried to focus on work, but my phone kept buzzing. Text messages from Natalie, each one more aggrieved than the last. I can't believe you embarrassed me like that in front of my colleagues. I was doing you a favor. You're so ungrateful. Always have been. I didn't respond. I'd learned that with Natalie, engaging just gave her more ammunition. Instead, I silenced my phone and spent the rest of the afternoon in the hives, doing the meditative work of inspecting frames, checking for signs of disease, making sure the queens were laying properly. The bees didn't care about family drama. They just did their work, each one contributing to the collective survival without ego or resentment. That evening, Mom called. I answered cautiously. Hi. Vanessa, sweetheart. Natalie told me what happened this morning. Of course she did. She's very upset. She said she was just trying to help and you threw her off the property. I set down the sandwich I'd been making and leaned against the kitchen counter. She showed up without asking, brought a camera crew to my facility without permission, and started filming during work hours. When I asked her to leave, she made it about herself. Mom was quiet for a moment. I'm sure it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a boundary violation. She sighed, and I could hear the weariness in it. Why does everything have to be so complicated with you two? She was trying to do something nice. Mom, if I showed up at her law office with a film crew and started recording her work without asking, would that be nice? That's different. How? Another pause. Your father wants to talk to you. My stomach dropped. About what? About all of this. The business, the tension with Natalie. He thinks maybe we should all sit down together and clear the air. I closed my eyes. I don't think that's a good idea. He thinks it would help. It won't. It'll just turn into everyone telling me I'm overreacting and need to be more flexible. That's not fair. Isn't it? When have you ever taken my side when Natalie and I disagree? Silence. Long enough that I thought maybe we'd been disconnected. Then, quietly, I'm always on both your sides. I'm your mother. Being on both sides is the same as being on neither side. I heard her inhale sharply. I have to go. Your father's calling me. She hung up before I could say anything else. I stood in my kitchen, in the cabin my grandmother had left me, surrounded by the life I'd built with my own hands, and felt completely alone. It was a familiar feeling, one I'd carried for most of my life, but it never got easier. The next week, Dad called. I let it ring twice before answering. Vanessa. His voice was measured, controlled. I think we need to talk about what's been happening. Okay. Your mother is very distressed. This situation with Natalie has gotten out of hand. I didn't create the situation. I just responded to it. By throwing your sister off your property. By enforcing a boundary after she violated it. He sighed, the sound heavy with disappointment I'd heard my entire life. You're being rigid. Family requires flexibility, compromise. I've been flexible my whole life. I've compromised constantly. This is one thing I'm not willing to compromise on. You're letting success go to your head. The words landed like a slap. Excuse me? You've had some wins in business and now you think you don't need to make room for family. That's short-sighted. I sat down on the couch, trying to control the anger rising in my chest. Dad, I spent years building this business while you told me it was a waste of time. Now that it's successful, you want me to let Natalie use it for her own purposes without asking. That's not me being short-sighted. That's me protecting what I've built. She was trying to help you get exposure. I don't need her help. I've been doing fine on my own. That attitude, right there. That's what I'm talking about. You become so defensive that you can't accept genuine support. It wasn't genuine support. It was her wanting credit for my success without having done any of the work. Another sigh. You know what? I was going to come visit the facility next month, but I don't think that's a good idea anymore. Not until you've sorted out your priorities. My priorities are fine. Are they? Because from where I'm standing, you're alienating the people who've always supported you. I almost laughed. Supported me? You told me this business was a joke. You said I was wasting my life. I was concerned about your future. That's not the same as not supporting you. It felt the same to me. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was colder. When you're ready to be reasonable, we can talk. Until then, I think it's best if we give each other some space. He hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling like I'd just been punched in the chest. The thing about family, the thing nobody tells you, is that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are the ones who make loving yourself the hardest. June found me an hour later, still sitting on the couch. She took one look at my face and said, "What happened?" I told her everything. The call with Dad, the implication that I'd become arrogant, the withdrawal of his visit. She listened, then sat down next to me. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Sure. I left my family 12 years ago. They were good people, loving people, but they couldn't accept that I was gay. They kept saying they loved me but they hated my lifestyle, which is just a fancy way of saying they loved an idea of me but not the actual me. I didn't know that. I don't talk about it much. But my point is, I built a new life. Found people who loved me for real. And it was hard and lonely sometimes, but it was better than staying in a place where I had to shrink myself to be acceptable. I'm not sure I'm ready to walk away from them completely. I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying that sometimes the people who are supposed to see us are the blindest. And waiting for them to get glasses doesn't work. You just have to decide whether you're going to keep dimming your light to make them comfortable." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what June had said, about dimming my light. I thought about all the times I'd made myself smaller, quieter, less ambitious because it was easier than dealing with my family's discomfort. I thought about how even now, even with everything I'd accomplished, I was still seeking validation from people who had never offered it freely. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and went to my laptop. I opened my email and started typing. "Dad," I wrote. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about our conversation, and I need you to understand something. I'm not being rigid or defensive. I'm being protective of something I built from nothing while you told me I was making a mistake. I'm setting boundaries with Natalie because she has a pattern of treating my life like a resource she can use without asking. And I'm disappointed that instead of seeing that, you've decided I'm the problem." I paused, reading over what I'd written. Then I kept going. "I don't need you to agree with my choices. I don't need you to understand why beekeeping matters to me. But I do need you to respect that this is my life, and I get to decide what happens in it. If you can't do that, then maybe space is the right choice for now." I signed it simply, Vanessa, and hit send before I could second-guess myself. The response came the next morning. Brief, cold, professional. Noted. Take care of yourself. That was it. No engagement with what I'd said, no acknowledgement of the vulnerability it had taken to write that email. Just dismissal dressed up as civility. I showed it to Aunt Lorraine over video chat that afternoon. She read it twice, then looked up at the camera with fire in her eyes. "He's punishing you for having a backbone." "I know. Your grandmother would be furious." "I know that too." She leaned back, arms crossed. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to keep building. That's all I can do. And if they never come around? Then I'll have built a life I'm proud of without them. It won't be what I wanted, but it'll be real." She nodded slowly. "That takes courage." "I don't feel very courageous." "That's how you know it's real courage. If it felt easy, it wouldn't count." The weeks that followed were strange. I threw myself into work, expanding production, meeting with distributors, planning for the national launch that would happen in 6 months. The business was thriving. We were on track to triple our revenue from the previous year. Whole Foods had placed orders that would take us through the next 18 months. Everything I'd dreamed of was happening. But I felt hollow. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to call Mom, then remembering the coldness in her voice during our last conversation. I'd have good news and instinctively want to share it with Dad, then remember that he'd decided I wasn't worth his time until I apologized for having boundaries. Natalie texted once, 3 weeks after the incident. "I'm sorry things got so messed up. I really was trying to help." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I appreciate the apology. But I need you to understand that help without consent isn't help. It's control." She didn't reply. In early June, Patricia called with news. Whole Foods Corporate wanted to do a feature on Cascade Meadow for their summer campaign. National ads, social media push, the works. It was the kind of exposure that could transform a regional brand into a household name. "This is huge," she said. "You should be celebrating." "I am. It's incredible." "You don't sound very excited." "I'm tired. It's been a complicated few months." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been in this industry a long time. I've seen a lot of people sacrifice everything for success, including relationships with people they love. Don't be one of those people, Vanessa. What if the people I love are asking me to sacrifice the success? Then maybe you need to ask yourself if that's actually love." After we hung up, I went outside and sat on the porch. The afternoon was warm, the sky clear and impossibly blue. Bees moved between the hives and the wildflowers I'd planted, their flight paths purposeful and efficient. They knew exactly what they were doing, exactly what their role was. No confusion, no second guessing, just the work they'd evolved to do. Mr. Holloway came up the driveway on foot, moving slowly with his walking stick. He'd been doing this more often lately, checking in without making it obvious that's what he was doing. "Big news day," he said, settling into the chair next to me. "How did you know?" "Small town. Plus, your truck's been parked in the same spot for 3 hours. That usually means something's brewing in that head of yours." I told him about the Whole Foods campaign, about Patricia's warning. He listened with his characteristic patience, not interrupting, not rushing to offer solutions. When I finished, he said, "Your grandmother had a saying. She'd tell me that roots grow deeper when there's resistance in the soil. Too much easy ground and the tree tips over in the first strong wind." What's that supposed to mean? That maybe all this difficulty is making you stronger. Making your foundation deeper. It doesn't feel like strength. It feels like loneliness. Sometimes those are the same thing. Not always, but sometimes. We sat in silence for a while, watching the sun move across the sky, the shadows lengthening across the property. Finally, he said, "You're going to have to decide what matters more. Their approval or your peace. You can't have both, not with people who require you to be small." What if I'm wrong? What if I am being too rigid? He looked at me with those clear eyes. "Are you asking them to accept who you are, or are you asking them to celebrate you doing something they don't understand? Because one of those is reasonable and the other is a luxury." "I don't know anymore." "Then sit with it. The answer will come." He left as the sun was setting, his figure growing smaller as he walked back down the road toward his own property. I stayed on the porch until the stars came out, until the desert air turned cool and crisp, until I could no longer avoid the truth that had been crystallizing in my mind for weeks. I couldn't make my family see me. I'd been trying for 30 years, and they either couldn't or wouldn't. But I could see myself. I could acknowledge my own worth, celebrate my own wins, build a life that didn't require external validation to feel real. It wasn't the answer I wanted. But it was the truth. The next morning, my phone rang at dawn. Unknown number, which I normally wouldn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Vanessa Reid?" "Yes. This is Daniel Martinez from Forbes." I'm doing a piece on emerging sustainable food brands, and your name came up. Do you have a few minutes to talk? I looked out the window at the hives, at the mountains beyond, at the life I'd built one decision at a time despite everyone telling me it was impossible. Yes, I said. I have time. The interview lasted 40 minutes. He asked about my background, my process, the challenges of scaling a beekeeping operation in a changing climate. He asked why I'd left a corporate job to pursue this, and I told him the truth. Because I needed to build something that was mine, something that didn't require me to be anyone other than who I am. When we finished, he said, "This is going to be a great story. Really inspiring." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and let myself feel it. Pride, uncomplicated and pure. Not pride that needed anyone else's acknowledgement, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd done something difficult and done it well. June arrived an hour later. She took one look at my face and grinned. Something good happened. Forbes interview. She actually hooped, and pulled me into a hug. I knew it. I knew this was going to blow up. It hasn't blown up yet. It will. Trust me. She was right. The Forbes article published 3 weeks later, a full feature with photos of the hives, the processing facility, me in my bee suit holding up a frame of honeycomb. The headline read, "How One Woman Built a Multi-Million-Dollar Honey Empire in the Oregon High Desert." The orders started immediately. The website crashed from traffic. My inbox filled with requests from retailers, restaurants, journalists wanting follow-up interviews. Within 48 hours, we'd received inquiries from distributors in 12 states. Tyler found me in the shed, staring at the computer screen. "This is insane." "I know. How are we going to fill all these orders?" "I don't know yet. But we'll figure it out." June organized an emergency staff meeting. We sat around the table in the processing shed, 5 of us now, and mapped out a plan. We'd need to double our hive count, hire more employees, possibly lease a larger facility. It was overwhelming and exhilarating and terrifying all at once. That night, exhausted but unable to sleep, I checked my email one more time. Buried among the hundreds of messages from strangers was one from a name I recognized. Mom. The subject line read, "We saw the article." I opened it with my heart pounding. "Vanessa, your father and I read the Forbes piece. We had no idea things had grown so much. We're very impressed. We'd like to talk when you have time. We miss you." I read it 3 times, looking for the catch, the qualification, the way they'd minimize the achievement even while acknowledging it. But it wasn't there. It was just a simple message from parents who'd finally seen what their daughter had built. I didn't know whether to feel vindicated or sad. Maybe both. I closed the laptop without responding and went outside. The stars were extraordinary, the Milky Way a river of light across the black sky. The bees were quiet in their hives, resting before another day of work that would begin at sunrise. I thought about everything that had brought me here. The dinner table confrontation 4 years ago. The long lonely months learning to be a beekeeper. The slow accumulation of small victories. The family that couldn't see me until the world forced them to look. And I realized something. Their recognition felt nice, but it didn't change anything fundamental. I was still the same person I'd been yesterday, doing the same work, building the same dream. Their approval didn't make it more real. That was the gift hidden in all the pain. Learning that I didn't need them to believe in me because I'd learned to believe in myself. The question now was whether I wanted to let them back in, and on what terms. That answer wasn't going to come tonight. But at least now I knew I got to choose. 3 days passed before I replied to Mom's email. I wrote and deleted 6 different responses, each one trying to find the balance between honesty and diplomacy, between protecting myself and leaving the door open. Finally, I settled on something simple. I'd be happy to talk. Let me know when works for you. She called that same afternoon, her voice careful and measured like she was approaching a wild animal that might bolt. We were thinking this Sunday. Maybe lunch at the house? Your father would really like to see you. I gripped the phone tighter. I can come to Portland, but I'd rather meet somewhere neutral. Not the house. There was a pause, and I could hear her processing this, recalibrating. Okay. Where would you like to meet? We agreed on a restaurant near Powell's bookstore, a quiet place with good food and enough ambient noise that awkward silences wouldn't feel quite so heavy. I spent the rest of the week alternating between dread and a cautious hope I didn't want to acknowledge. Saturday night, Aunt Lorraine called to check in. How are you feeling about tomorrow? Nervous. Uncertain. Like I'm walking into a trap I can't quite see yet. She was quiet for a moment. You know you don't have to do this, right? You don't owe them anything just because they finally read an article about you. I know. But I want to see if anything's actually changed. And if it hasn't? Then at least I'll know for sure. She sighed. Your grandmother used to say that hoping someone will change is like planting tomatoes in December and expecting a harvest. Some things need the right conditions, and you can't create those conditions for other people. I sat with that image for a while after we hung up. Tomatoes in December. It felt accurate in a way that made my chest ache. Sunday morning arrived cold and gray, typical June gloom that wouldn't burn off until afternoon. I dressed carefully, nothing too polished but nothing that looked like I'd just come from the hives either. I wanted to look successful but not like I was trying to prove anything. The fact that I was thinking about it this much probably meant I was already losing. The drive to Portland felt longer than usual. I listened to a podcast about climate change and pollinator decline, trying to distract myself from the conversation I was about to have. By the time I pulled into the restaurant parking lot, my hands were clammy on the steering wheel. They were already there, seated at a corner booth. Dad stood when he saw me, an old-fashioned gesture he'd always maintained. He looked thinner than I remembered, older. Retirement had stripped away some essential vitality. Mom smiled, but it was tentative, testing. We exchanged awkward hugs and sat down. The server came by with water and menus, and we all studied them with more intensity than necessary, grateful for something to focus on besides each other. After we ordered, Dad cleared his throat. Thank you for coming. Of course. We wanted to talk to you about the Forbes article. It was very impressive. I waited, knowing there was more coming. There was always more coming. We had no idea the business had grown to that scale. Your mother and I have been talking, and we realize we may have been too quick to judge what you were building. May have been. The qualifiers were still there, the hedging, but I forced myself to stay quiet and listen. Mom reached across the table like she was going to take my hand, then seemed to think better of it. We're proud of you, sweetheart. We just wish you'd kept us more involved. And there it was. The subtle pivot that made my exclusion of them somehow my fault. I set down my water glass carefully. You didn't want to be involved. You told me I was wasting my life. Dad shifted in his seat. We were concerned. That's different from not wanting to be involved. You withdrew your visit when I set boundaries with Natalie. You stopped answering my calls. That's not concern, Dad. That's punishment. His jaw tightened. We needed space to process your behavior. My behavior was telling Natalie she couldn't film at my facility without permission. That's not unreasonable. Mom jumped in, her voice taking on that placating tone I knew so well. Nobody's saying it was unreasonable. We just think maybe the way you handled it was a bit harsh. Natalie was very hurt. I took a slow breath, trying to keep my voice level. Natalie showed up with a camera crew, disrupted my work day, moved my equipment, and when I asked her to leave, she made it about how ungrateful I was. I wasn't harsh. I was protecting my business. Dad leaned forward. Family should come before business. The words hung in the air between us, and I felt something inside me go very still and very cold. Family should come before business. Coming from a man who'd missed countless family dinners, school events, birthdays because of business. Coming from a man who'd built his entire identity around his company and then judged his daughter for doing the same thing. That's interesting, I said quietly. Because I don't remember you putting family before business when you missed my college graduation because of a client meeting in Seattle. His face flushed. That was different. I was building something. So am I. You've already built it. Now you need to make room for the people who matter. I stared at him, at this man who'd never made room for me, who was now demanding I make room for him. The server arrived with our food, and we all sat in strained silence while she arranged plates and asked if we needed anything else. After she left, Mom tried again. We just want to be part of your life, Vanessa. Is that really so terrible? It's not terrible. It's just 4 years too late. Her eyes filled with tears, and I felt a pang of guilt immediately. That was her gift, the way she could make you feel cruel for simply telling the truth. We made mistakes, she said softly. Parents make mistakes. But we're trying to fix them now. Are you? Because it seems like you're trying to rewrite history. You didn't make mistakes, Mom. You made choices. You chose to dismiss what I was doing. You chose to side with Natalie when she violated my boundaries. You chose to cut me off when I didn't apologize for having standards. Dad's voice was sharp. You're being unfair. Am I? Let me ask you something. If the Forbes article had never been published, if Whole Foods hadn't picked up my honey, if I was still just selling at farmers markets, would we be having this conversation? The silence that followed was answer enough. Of course we would, Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. I don't think so. I think you'd still be waiting for me to come crawling back, ready to admit I'd made a mistake. You only want to be involved now because other people validated what I built. You couldn't see the value in it yourselves. Dad pushed his plate away, barely touched. You're right. We didn't see it. We were wrong. Is that what you want to hear? I want you to mean it. Not just say it because you're embarrassed that other people saw what you couldn't. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Not quite understanding, but maybe the beginning of it. I don't know how to fix this, he said finally. Tell me what you want from us. I want you to accept that I built this without you. Not in spite of you, just without you. I want you to understand that your approval doesn't make it more legitimate, and your disapproval doesn't make it less so. And I want you to respect my boundaries with Natalie without making me the villain. That's a lot to ask. It's the bare minimum, actually. Mom dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. What about moving forward? Can we find a way to be in each other's lives again? I don't know yet. I need to think about it. We finished the meal in uncomfortable silence, making small talk about nothing important, avoiding the minefield we just barely navigated. When the check came, Dad insisted on paying. A peace offering, or maybe just habit. Outside the restaurant, Mom hugged me tightly. I do love you, she whispered. Even if I haven't shown it well. I know, I said, and I did. But knowing someone loved you and feeling loved by them were two different things. Dad's hug was briefer, more formal. Think about what we talked about. We'd like to visit the facility sometime, if you're willing. I'll let you know. I drove back to Bend with the radio off, needing the silence to process what had just happened. They'd apologized, sort of. They'd acknowledged being wrong, kind of. But it all felt conditional, like they were doing the minimum required to get back into my good graces without actually changing anything fundamental. When I got home, June was at the processing shed finishing up a late bottling run. She took one look at my face and said, "That bad?" Not bad exactly. Just complicated. She handed me a jar of honey from the batch she'd just finished. Here. Comfort food. I unscrewed the lid and dipped my finger in, tasting the familiar sweetness, the complex floral notes that came from the desert in bloom. This is good. Really good. It's the lavender fields we partnered with last month. Makes a huge difference. We sat on the porch of the shed, passing the jar back and forth like teenagers sharing a secret, and I told her about lunch. She listened without judgment, without trying to fix it, just present and solid beside me. "Sounds like they want the relationship without doing the work," she said when I'd finished. "That's exactly what it feels like." "So what are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. Part of me wants to let them in, to believe they've actually changed. But another part of me knows that the first time I do something they don't like, we'll be right back here. Then maybe you set up a trial period. See if they can respect boundaries before you give them full access." I looked at her. "When did you get so wise?" She grinned. "Years of therapy and disappointing my own family. You learn things." That week, I focused on work. We had orders to fill, new hives to install, employees to train. The business demanded my full attention, which was a mercy. But in the quiet moments, usually late at night when sleep wouldn't come, I kept circling back to the same question. Did I want my family and my life badly enough to risk them hurting me again? Thursday afternoon, Natalie texted. "Mom said you guys had lunch. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Sure. When?" We agreed to meet for coffee the next day, a place halfway between Bend and Portland, neutral ground. I arrived early and ordered a black coffee I didn't really want, just to have something to hold. Natalie showed up right on time, dressed in business casual, hair perfect as always. She ordered some elaborate latte and sat down across from me with a careful smile. "Thanks for meeting me." "Of course." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the Forbes article came out. About how I've treated you, about the way I showed up at your facility." "Okay. I was out of line. I didn't respect your boundaries, and I made your success about me instead of celebrating it on your terms." The apology sounded rehearsed, but at least it was specific. I appreciated that. "Thank you for saying that." She looked down at her latte. "I think I've been jealous. Not of the honey business specifically, but of the fact that you did something brave. You left security and built something from nothing, and I've just been following the path everyone expected me to follow. I hadn't expected that level of honesty. It caught me off guard." "You're successful too, Natalie. You're a partner at your firm. I'm successful at doing what Dad wanted me to do. That's not the same thing." We sat in silence for a moment, and I felt the edges of my anger softening slightly. Not gone, but less sharp. "I don't know how to fix this," she said. "I don't know how to be the kind of sister you deserve. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to ask before you involve yourself in my life. And when I say no, I need you to respect that without making it a referendum on our relationship." She nodded slowly. "I can try to do that. Trying isn't enough. You have to actually do it." "You're right." She met my eyes. "I'm sorry, Ness. Really sorry. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a crack in the wall, a place where light could get in." "I'll think about it," I said. "But I need time." "I understand." After she left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, watching people come and go, thinking about family and forgiveness and whether you could have one without the other. I didn't have answers, but at least I was asking better questions. June called that evening with news. We got an inquiry from a major distributor. They want to talk about national grocery chains beyond Whole Foods. My heart jumped. "Which distributor?" She named a company that supplied thousands of stores across the country. If we partnered with them, Cascade Meadow would go from regional success to national brand practically overnight. "When do they want to meet?" "Next week. They're flying someone to Bend to see the operation." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight and possibility of it. "Okay. Let's make sure everything's perfect." The next few days were a blur of preparation. We cleaned the facility until it gleamed, organized inventory, prepared samples, rehearsed talking points. Tyler made a joke about it feeling like we were preparing for royalty, and in a way, we were. This meeting could change everything. The distributor's representative arrived on a Wednesday morning, a woman named Sharon with steel gray hair and an expression that gave nothing away. She toured the facility with meticulous attention, asked detailed questions about our production capacity, sustainability practices, supply chain logistics. I'd never felt more scrutinized or more proud of what we'd built. At the end of the tour, she stood in front of the hives, watching the bees work. Your product is exceptional. Your operation is solid. But I need to know you can scale without compromising quality. We can. We've built in quality controls at every stage, and we've been gradually increasing production for 3 years. We know how to grow responsibly. She turned to face me. We'd want exclusive rights to certain product lines. I'd need to see the terms, but I'm open to discussion. She smiled for the first time. Good. We'll be in touch with a formal proposal by the end of the month. After she left, the entire team gathered in the processing shed. We stood there looking at each other, and then June started laughing. Just started laughing, and then we all were, the kind of relieved, disbelieving laughter that comes after holding your breath for too long. We might actually do this, Tyler said. We might actually go national. We're going to do this, I corrected. We've earned it. That night, alone in the cabin, I pulled out my laptop and opened my email. I'd been avoiding it, but I knew I couldn't put it off forever. I found the message from Mom, still sitting in my inbox, unanswered beyond that first brief reply. I started typing. Mom and Dad, I wrote. I've been thinking about our conversation at lunch. I appreciate you reaching out, and I understand that you're trying to make amends. But I need you to understand something. I didn't build this business to prove you wrong or to make you regret not supporting me. I built it because it was what I needed to do for myself. Your approval is nice, but it doesn't define the worth of what I've created. I paused, reading over what I'd written. Then I continued. If you want to be part of my life moving forward, I need some things from you. I need you to respect my decisions without trying to manage them. I need you to support Natalie and me having a relationship that works for us, not the one you think we should have. And I need you to understand that forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. I remember how hard these last 4 years have been, and I can't just pretend they didn't happen. I'm willing to try, but it has to be on terms that feel safe for me. That might mean slower than you'd like, less access than you want. But it's the only way I can do this without losing myself again. I signed it and hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I closed the laptop and went outside. The stars were brilliant, scattered across the sky like someone had spilled diamonds. The air was cool and smelled of sage and distant pine. From the hives came the subtle hum of thousands of bees, the sound of life continuing regardless of human drama, regardless of hurt feelings and complicated families. I thought about Grandmother Iris, about the note she'd left me. Use it for something that makes your heart loud. My heart was loud now, so loud I could barely hear anything else. Loud with pride and grief and hope and uncertainty all mixed together. The reply came the next morning. It was from Dad, surprisingly. Not Mom. Vanessa, I read your email. You're right about everything. I let my ego and my fears keep me from seeing what you were building, and I'm sorry. Truly sorry, not just sorry that you're upset. Your mother and I will respect whatever boundaries you need. Take your time. We'll be here. It wasn't everything. It wasn't a magic fix that erased 4 years of pain. But it was something. Something real and honest that felt like it came from a place deeper than obligation or embarrassment. I forwarded the email to Aunt Lorraine with the subject line, "Is this progress?" She called immediately. That's definitely progress. How do you feel? Cautiously optimistic. Which is probably the best I can hope for right now. She laughed. That's healthy. Don't rush it, honey. Let them prove they mean it. The distributor's proposal arrived 2 weeks later. 20 pages of terms and projections and commitments that would take Cascade Meadow from a small regional brand to a player in the national market. The numbers were staggering. If we accepted, We'd be looking at revenue that would dwarf anything I'd imagined in those early days at the farmer's market. I called an emergency meeting with June and Tyler. We sat around the table in the processing shed, passing the proposal back and forth, reading sections aloud, trying to wrap our heads around what this meant. "This is life-changing," June said. "For all of us." Tyler was more cautious. "It's also a huge risk. If we can't deliver, we're done." "We can deliver," I said. "We've been preparing for this. We know our capacity, we know our limits. This is what we've been building toward. So we're doing it." I looked at both of them, these people who'd believed in me when my own family couldn't. "We're doing it." The contracts were signed in early August. The announcement went out in September. Cascade Meadow honey would be available in major grocery chains nationwide by November, just in time for the holiday season. The press picked it up immediately. More articles, more interviews, more attention than I knew what to do with. And through it all, my family stayed at a respectful distance. They sent congratulatory texts when appropriate. They didn't show up unannounced or try to insert themselves into the process. Mom called once a week, brief conversations that stuck to safe topics. Dad sent articles he'd read about sustainable agriculture, little offerings that said "I'm thinking about you" without demanding anything in return. It was strange, this new dynamic. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for them to revert to old patterns. But weeks passed and they didn't. They were trying, actually trying, and I found myself softening despite my best efforts to stay guarded. In late October, I sent them an invitation. A small celebration at the facility for employees and close friends, a thank you for everyone who'd made this possible. I wasn't sure they'd come, wasn't even sure I wanted them to. But I sent it anyway. They RSVP'd yes within an hour. The celebration happened on a Saturday afternoon in late October, when the aspens had turned gold and the air carried that particular crispness that meant winter wasn't far behind. We'd set up tables outside the processing shed, strung lights between the buildings, arranged platters of food that people had volunteered to bring. It felt less like a corporate event and more like a family reunion, which was exactly what I'd wanted. Mom and Dad arrived just after 2, driving separately from Natalie, who'd texted that she was running late from a morning yoga class. I watched them get out of their car, watched Dad survey the property with an expression I couldn't quite read. They'd dressed casually, which felt like an effort on their part. Dad in khakis and a polo shirt instead of his usual button-down. Mom in jeans I'd never seen her wear before. I met them near the parking area, suddenly nervous in a way I hadn't anticipated. Mom hugged me first, holding on a beat longer than necessary. "It's beautiful here," she said quietly. "I can see why you love it." Dad shook my hand, then seemed to think better of it and pulled me into an awkward hug. "Thank you for inviting us. I'm glad you came." I introduced them to June and Tyler, to Mr. Holloway who'd arrived early and was already holding court near the food table, to the 3 newer employees they hadn't met. I watched Dad talk to Tyler about hive management, actually listening instead of waiting for his turn to speak. I watched Mom examine the labels on our product display, reading every word like they mattered. Natalie arrived 20 minutes later, bringing wine and apologies. She hugged me carefully, still testing the boundaries of what was allowed. The 3 of us stood together, my parents and my sister, and for the first time in years it didn't feel like a performance. It just felt like people trying. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself relaxing into it. Dad asked intelligent questions about our expansion plans. Mom helped set out food without taking over. Natalie spent half an hour talking to June about the legal structures of small businesses, genuinely interested, not performing interest for my benefit. When the sun started to sink toward the mountains, casting everything in amber light, I called everyone together. I hadn't planned a speech, but standing there with all these people who'd believed in me or learned to believe in me, I felt like I needed to say something. 4 years ago, I started this with 4 beehives and a dream that everyone told me was impractical. I looked at my parents when I said it, saw Dad's jaw tighten slightly. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I needed to build something that was mine, something that didn't require anyone's permission to exist. People nodded, smiled. Mr. Holloway raised his beer in salute. I couldn't have done it without the people in this circle. June and Tyler, who took a chance on a struggling beekeeper who could barely pay minimum wage. Mr. Holloway, who shared his wisdom and his land. Aunt Lorraine, who called every week to remind me I wasn't crazy. I paused, then added, and my family, who are learning to see me in ways they couldn't before. That takes courage too. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Dad looked down at his feet, but I saw his throat work as he swallowed. This business isn't just about honey. It's about proving that you can build a life on your own terms, even when it's hard, even when people you love don't understand. And it's about learning that success doesn't require everyone's approval. It just requires your own commitment to showing up every day and doing the work. June started clapping, and then everyone joined in. It wasn't a long speech or a particularly eloquent one, but it was honest. And that felt like enough. Later, as people were starting to leave, Dad found me by the hives. He stood there for a long moment, watching the bees make their final flights of the day, coming home heavy with the last pollen of the season. Your grandmother would be proud, he said finally. I wish I'd told you that 4 years ago instead of now. I stood next to him, both of us watching the hives. Me too. I'm trying to understand why I couldn't see it. Why I fought you so hard on this. I think you saw yourself at my age, taking risks with your consulting firm. And you remembered how scary it was, how close you came to failing. You didn't want that for me. He nodded slowly. But I forgot that the fear was part of it. That's what made it worth doing. We stood in comfortable silence for a while, the longest peaceful moment we'd shared in years. Then he said, the Whole Foods deal was impressive. But this, all of this, it's more than I ever built. You didn't just create a business. You created a community. Thanks, Dad. He turned to look at me, and his eyes were wet. I'm sorry I made you do it alone. I wasn't completely alone. I had people. Just not the ones I expected. He nodded, accepting that truth. Well, you've got us now. If you want us. I do. But on different terms than before. I understand. And I'll work on that. We both will. After everyone had left and the sun had fully set, I walked through the facility alone. The processing shed with its neat rows of equipment. The hives standing silent in the darkness, full of bees clustered around their queens. The cabin where this had all started, small and weathered and perfect. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Patricia from Whole Foods. Just heard some news I wanted to share directly. We've had preliminary discussions about a potential acquisition offer. Are you interested in hearing more? I stared at the message, my heart suddenly pounding. An acquisition. Someone wanted to buy Cascade Meadow. I thought about the number she'd mentioned in passing once, the kinds of offers that got made for successful brands like mine. 44 million had been her conservative estimate. I typed back slowly. Yes. Let's talk next week. Then I sat down on the porch steps and let myself feel the enormity of it. Everything I'd built, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd proven, it had led here. To a moment where I got to choose what came next, completely on my own terms. I thought about calling my parents, sharing the news. But I stopped myself. This moment was mine first. They could know later, after I'd decided what I wanted to do. After I'd sat with the weight and possibility of it without anyone else's voice in my head. The desert stretched out before me, vast and dark and full of life invisible in the darkness. Somewhere out there, wildflowers were waiting for spring. And in the hives behind me, 30,000 bees were doing what they'd always done, building something extraordinary, one small addition at a time. I'd learned to do the same. And now, finally, the world was offering to pay attention. Not because I'd asked for it, but because I'd built something too good to ignore. That was the victory. Not the money, not the recognition, not even my family's eventual acceptance. The victory was knowing I'd done it anyway, with or without any of that. Everything else was just confirmation of what I'd already known. I built this. And nobody could take that away. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.